are a clinical psychologist for 25 years of experience you have. So when was the time when you actually inclined towards AI, basically? And I want your introduction first. I just forgot. Yeah.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Hi, Vidushi. Thanks for the invite. It's nice to meet you. Yes, and your 25 years made me smile now. I'll actually have to go back and count, because of course, for anyone listening, the road to clinical psychology is quite a long road. You need quite a lot of diverse experience, and people start as assistant psychologists and all sorts. So kind of it depends when you start. When you start the clock. But of course, the whole idea, the study of psychology is people. So sorry, my name's obviously Dr. Marie Cairns. And so people, psychology is the study of people. And so obviously I've always been interested and curious about people, and I care about people and their well-being. So even though a lot of people are surprised that kind of almost jump between psychology and the AI world, it to me it was a very natural sort of bridge. If you think about it, artificial intelligence is going to impact all of us. It's just such a massive part of what's happening in the world right now. And we're still 8.2, I haven't counted recently, but we're still 8.3 or 8.4, billion people. Is going to impact all of us. So it was genuinely quite a natural bridge, that idea of psychology and human factors in AI. Um, and me very specifically, it was quite a few years ago. I briefly mentioned it in one of my Substack articles. I was visiting engineering friends in Colorado, and we were just chatting about about things, and we started talking about artificial intelligence. And then they showed me this website. If you or anybody else is interested, the website still exists, but it looks quite different now than it did back then. And the site is called This Person Does Not Exist. And I remember when we opened that and I looked at that, just realizing it was like a penny drop moment for me of, gosh, this is going to impact people. And like I say, the site looks quite different today than it did back then. But the idea is still there. How you can literally just tick 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 simulate a human being, looks very real. You wouldn't be able to tell, and there you go. And the person doesn't exist. And I just realized, if you can fake something that easily, there's going to be massive implications down the road. So that was pretty much quite at the start of it, where I realized, okay, there's going to be human factors. Yeah.
So, do you think that psychology is still largely missing from the mainstream AI conversations? I mean, is it still missing?
Sorry, is psychology? Just please repeat your question.
So, like, do you think that psychology is still largely missing from the mainstream AI conversation right now, in at present?
Mm. Look, I believe there are a lot of different professions, not just psychology. I believe that a lot of different professions should really become a part of the mainstream AI, sort of conversations, just because, again, AI is going to impact all of us across all industries, all streams, and it seems to me that what started, and look, there is movement for sure, but it seems to me at the build level, it started really small, and it's meaning, very specific what sort of person builds, AI at the build level. And so I kind of make a case for many different professions and people with different expertise and domain expertise to become part of the conversations, purely because it's going to impact all of us. And so often, it's going to impact the rest of us downstream, but where the real impact is more upstream, where decisions get made, where models get built. So yeah, I do believe there's a big, I believe there's a big gap, and that we can just put so much more domain expertise upstream.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, this is a topic which is very concerning for every one of us right now. And it's not something which is, we cannot ignore it because AI is being used by everyone so much so that it's affecting our minds. So you have said something very interesting, like look before the effects become obvious because by the time they are obvious, they will become normal. So have we reached a point at that point right now, or are we reaching? Where are we?
Sorry about that. Just repeat that question. Sorry, the sound isn't all that great on my side. I just want to be sure I catch your question. You were just repeat that last part.
Like you said that look before the effects become obvious, because by the time they are obvious, they are already, knowable. I have like I remember that. So have we reached that point right now currently? Where are we? At which stage are we right now?
And I mean, this is one of those questions, depends who you ask, right? So first of all, I don't know, it's so many people are, it depends first of all, where do we start and how long is a piece of string? But just a bit of the history of AI again. So many people, I want to say that probably ChatGPT of the LLMs was the one that probably made a lot of people in mainstream society kind of aware of artificial intelligence and use it daily and everything. But AI itself is, of course, it's 70 years old, so it's seven decades ago that it
Hmm.
started there at the Dartmouth conference. So first of all, it really has a long, a 7 decade history, but it's only in recent years that we are now starting to use it in mainstream society. And it's kind of becoming part of our everyday lives. But the effects, like you are asking, it's one of those things of the sooner we really start thinking about the effects that we can steer them, the better. It's the same with social media, and it's the same with big sort of technologies in history that shaped society and that shaped our futures. The more we're aware of what's happening and the more we can steer it, that the impacts and the effects, any downstream effects and impacts, that it doesn't blindside us, or that we don't go back, years from now going, gosh, we can't believe we allowed that, or why did we not mitigate for this, or why did we not look at this risk. And it is a tricky one because, of course, there's a lot to look at, and it depends. Different people will see it different and look at different things. But, back to your question about effects, absolutely. It's like anything. We would be so wise to ask these questions now and to think of these things now because it will impact all of us.
Yeah, I mean, truly it's going to impact everyone right now. So, what do you think we are most underestimating right now about psychological cost of everyday AI use? I mean, what are we underestimating?
That's a really good question. And again, they are, it is case by case. It depends how we use it, how often we use it, and what we make of it. But I think for me, a big one is just to be really aware. It's more about awareness, that we are truly aware of what we're dealing with. When we engage with a large language model, when we talk to it, when we ask it stuff, I think that just really that we're aware of that it is a machine that we're talking to, and that's giving us increasingly more powerful and really quite good output. Just that we're aware of what we're dealing with. Um, because of course one of the things that's happening is people are using AI more and more, which is absolutely, it's going to happen, but there there is a trend that people are using it more instead of engagement and connection with other people, with other humans. And they will be, there will be implications, and there will be impacts for it. So it's more awareness will be a big one for me, just that people walk into this with open eyes. I think that's an
Yeah,
important one, just be aware
actually,
of. Yeah.
I mean, you are absolutely right, because we are so much prone to using AI now because we want answers instead of waiting for the patience is going and we just prompt and output. We just want the answer. And sometimes what happens is that we don't look the answer, the whole answer we won't read, and okay, it's fine because it's been generated from an AI model. Obviously, it will be fine because, yeah, trust it. So, at what point does assistance quietly becomes dependency? There's a very fine line between when we overshare and when we actually have to share the information. So, where is that assistance actually becomes dependency?
And this really will be case by case. There isn't a. it will really depend on each person, and people will need to decide for themselves. That's quite important. I don't want to say, yeah, this is right, this is wrong, do this, don't do that. It's not about being too prescriptive, but it's really that people are aware. And so one of the things I want to say about, when you're saying about dependency, so this will be an interesting one to watch, because again, it will have both individual implications, for each of us individually, the impacts AI will have on us, and also then collectively, more society wise, how will it change if a lot of people are going to engage with AI more and more, especially if it's instead of their other relationships or friendships, or instead of talking to a colleague or whatever the case may be. And of course, romantic relationships is the kind of next the kind of next port of call that's obviously going to be quite big in the world. But yes, that whole idea is just to really notice what's happening. um and really that people understand, these models are built, they're going to be built more and more powerful. And by the way, of course, so for a lot of us, we use the mainstream large language models, and by the way, there are loads of different ones, not just the handful of well-known ones from the big AI labs. There are loads of different ones. But then, of course, people are going to have more and more personalized agents too. And the agents will be almost that next level. It's really going to impact. So, it's whether someone still does ordinary day to day stuff, or whether the AI agent is almost going to become such a part of their day to day life. So any dependency, it will be case by case, but it's that people are aware of how these models are built, how they are trained, what happens. And, I like to kind of talk about notice both what's happening with AI when we interact with AI, but then also notice what's happening within yourself. That's really important. Notice your mood, notice your tolerance levels, notice your attention span, all the kind of human stuff. Just really be aware of it and notice it.
Yeah, absolutely. And but I believe one more thing I want to say, that why we are trusting something which is not human, and why that the trust is so much so building up. What do you think people from such real psychological attachments, why do they form such kind of psychological attachment with a machine, if we say, in normal way?
So first of all, it's easier, right? These models are literally, so depending on which model you use, and kind of if you look at some of the labs, and almost, these models are literally built to be helpful and friendly and responsive. They kind of all built, there are many similarities and overlaps, but then, with specific almost values that they're built into. And so they literally built to be easy, and that we want to engage with them, and that we want to trust them. Because also remember, with these large language models, there are also businesses behind them, right? These AI labs are spending a fortune on building these things and maintaining these large language models. And ideally, and obviously a lot of them are free, but a lot of people, they pay for process subscriptions, or of course enterprise level and stuff. But so they are built to be helpful, and that people trust them, and that want to use them, because companies would love it if you use, their AI model. So yeah, so that whole trust thing, it's easy. It's easy to engage with an AI model. And when for people who are interested, and I know you touched on it, that idea of, you know so how these AI models are behaving. So AI models are also trained to be quite agreeable, or what they call in the AI safety, research world, they talk about AI, sycophancy in AI. That idea of, the AI is likely to agree with you. And of course, many people talk about it, and there are many people that now almost say, well, they do notice it, or they would almost prompt it to say, okay, don't necessarily agree with me. And, there are all sorts of caveats. But the reality is AI sycophancy is actually a well-known construct in the AI safety in the research world. So yeah, so trusting it is just almost a bit easier. The
But I had a question regarding that. Why are we depending on AI, even though we know that it's a machine.
Mhm. And look, so one of the things, like we said, it's easy, right? So, these models are built to be helpful and friendly and responsive, and we can ask them anything. And so it's quite easy. And they're also built to agree with us, so that we kind of mentioned about the AI sycophancy. But I also think there's something about the accessibility. So, people have access 24/7, if they do, if they've got access and internet and stuff. And so that 24/7 availability, I do think is a factor. So it's almost that always available idea. But I also do believe there's something more in that, because say we had, I don't know, we had, a search engine available to us too. And it's not to say that we would have necessarily used it, 24/7. Now, of course, a lot of people, social media, a lot of people use that quite a lot. But artificial intelligence is different in that the way it feels more two-way. The way, we can talk to it, it answers us, it gives output, and I think that's definitely adding to it. Just in how we talk to it, how we engage with it. And I think people are just going to use it more and more in those sort of terms. I don't know if you've seen some
Absolutely.
of the latest studies, some of there was a, yes, I want to say, did Harvard publish it? I'll need to go check the source again. But yes, that idea of companionship is now really quite high up on the list. People are using it for companionship or for support or, for advice, or, it definitely has more of that emotional tone. So it's not just, oh, please give me the, formula for this and this. It's not just basic questions anymore. It really and truly is getting more and more conversational with these large language models.
Absolutely. And I personally believe, like, uh, when I was testing AI, and we talked about sycophancy, right? So I took one statement, and I was like doing some legal research. So I took a statement, and I stated that this statement is correct, although that statement was totally wrong. So I tried to manipulate. Claude, I was working on Claude, so I was trying to manipulate and doing like, okay, it's wrong, right? So the answer was very, very very complex answer I got. It was something like, you are wrong, but this. So I was like, why aren't you saying that it's wrong? It's totally wrong. Why are you not correcting me there? So that's where I felt like that human effect is not there. And secondly, I would also like to say that, but if we talk about when we are sharing something about our lives, for example, we try to share a lot of things. So that the laugh in between, the way it's portraying everything, the way it's acting, it's like a human. So there we are very much. We are believing that it's a human being talking to us. Have you ever caught your own AI agreeing with something you said that you don't actually believe yourself? Is there?
Oh, yes, and because I test these models, so I use quite a few different ones just because I have to and kind of, check what's happening. But I also, I do have the ones that I tend to use more. And absolutely, it's a fact. And especially when you test them, how it can absolutely continue to agree. You actually reminded me now once. I once had something, it was cut and dry, it was factual about a time zone. I kid thee not, something as basic as it was an actual time. So there was no kind of, it was the exact date, no, with everything, with any time zone differences. And this AI model was adamant. And I then just started realizing, but hang on, I am now, because obviously by then I started, Googling and, kind of, because I started doubting myself. And I got to a point where actually, no, I know I'm right here. And this was a while back, but I remember this AI model being so adamant and so convincing and so persuasive. And if I remember correctly, I went back in the chat eventually, and and then in the end, the AI model did kind of, oh, my bad, and kind of total. I was like, what just happened? And I went back, and when I revisited this conversation, I counted, I'm not exaggerating. I think it was almost 8 or 9 turns in this conversation that this AI model was totally convincing me that it is categorically correct. And I remember thinking, whoa, this is something as basic as a time, because it was some other meeting or something. I can't remember, because usually, my stuff's automatic. And I remember it as such a basic example of, I'm sure someone would easily, to have a 8 or 9 times, round conversation, I'm sure a lot of people would just give up or believe it, or, be late for the meeting, but it was such a good example. And it was, what was also interesting, it was very persuasive. And it gave absolutely detailed feedbacks of where it was correct all the time, actually being incorrect. Yeah, and again, that's something. So one of the things for me is the persuasiveness and the influence these
Hmm.
models are going to start having on us.
Absolutely.
Because remember, once again, when we talk more emotional stuff with it, or, language is very powerful, and how we
Hmm.
use it and how we perceive it, nuance is really going to matter. And these models it's going to have a big influence on us. And I hope people realize just how much. Um, yeah,
Absolutely.
especially with these more kind of these more, emotional, or, life advice, or, companionship
Hmm.
sort of conversations. Yeah.
So, I mean, this is something which is very, I mean, it's very important for us to figure out in our lives, because it will hamper our daily lives if we trust it so much so that it's difficult to differentiate what is actually happening and what is real and what is virtual. So, do you think the bigger danger is the fake content itself, or the slow erosion of our ability to know what to believe at all?
Oh, that's such a great question. I want to say, hold on to, all strands of that question, because so fakes is a real concern. I genuinely think, and it kind of links back to what we said in the beginning. When I visited those friends in Colorado, and they showed me that website of, this person does not exist. Do have a quick look at it. So fake content, and that comes in different forms, right? It can be faked. Something can be faked, whether it's an image, or an article, or information, or, whatever, any sort of. It can be it can be swayed. So it can, they can sneak something in, what you told or what you're not told, what's withheld from you. I will give you this piece of information, but I won't give you this piece. And then you can't weigh it up or make an informed decision. By the way, with voting, this is of course a massive thing. It's not, some stuff deliberately gets withheld from voters, that they kind of, massive. Then, of course, misinformation, disinformation, but especially deep fakes. As a psychologist, deep fakes really, I can absolutely see the vast impacts this could have on people's lives. Videos, content, anything, it can have real implications for people's lives. And, there's a real place for harm here, and it can have such significant impacts on people's lives, that worries me quite a bit. Then on the other side, like you were saying about, just that gradualness, yes, I can see, for me, and just to almost, just a bit of, I don't believe in the, if you read my Substack, hopefully you'll get that, that more balanced view. AI has a lot of potential. There's a lot of stuff that we can gain from it as society, as humanity. If it's like anything, if we do it well, there could be so many great impacts, especially I believe in the healthcare field. I think there's a real kind of, potential for real, breakthroughs there. But it's like anything in this world, when human nature kicks in, it's that whatever we do, that we really think it through, and that we kind of do it well. So, when people talk about AGI, and, all of the, people have so many different opinions. And, I'm not going to hang my hat necessarily on a date. I genuinely, hand on heart, even though I look at these things daily, I don't wake up in the morning when I have my coffee and think, oh, in that year, that's it, we're all done for, AI is going to take over. And maybe that's more, personal belief, or just the way I kind of view the world. And I'm not necessarily knocking it. I do see the worry, I do see the concerns, I do see how powerful these systems get, but maybe that's just me, and I'd rather have the next coffee and think it through, kind of. But I do believe, linking to what you were saying, I do believe that that gradual disempowerment is going to be a big, big thing. So, I don't necessarily say that, in X amount of years on a random Tuesday, that's it, we're all done for. Humanity is gone and, obliterated, and, people will flee to their bunkers. That's not kind of my view on it. But I do believe that gradual disempowerment is going to be massive. And it's one of those things, I wonder, I really hope we notice it. I really hope day to day we keep asking questions, we keep seeing,
Mm.
as a person, like I say, that we keep thinking, what is artificial intelligence doing? What impacts having on my life, on my relationships, on my choices, my decisions, my thoughts, my mood. So
Yes.
both the things around us each, but also within us, literally our, almost our inner worlds. Like I said, what's it doing to my mood? I really want people to notice it. Have you ever chatted to an LLM and actually got frustrated, or or kind of notice these things? Notice if
Yeah,
kind of
absolutely. It's
change, or yeah.
and we try to try to manage it accordingly. Like, why are you not able to understand what I'm trying to say? So okay, so I don't want to make this comparison because it's nowhere there. But how will an AI advice by a psychologist will be different from advice by an AI? I mean, this is something which is demeaning from my point of view, because a psychologist is working so hard and then you are just comparing it with an AI model. So, but what is the difference? How will we, like, how will the advice be different?
And do you mean, so kind of when you come more for the support sort of stuff for mental health, and you kind of almost engage more on that sort of level, right? So this is interesting because, and when I have conversations with other people and other psychologists, I try to keep a balanced view here. So I've met psychologists who, they wouldn't go anywhere near AI. They think it is absolutely, and they are absolutely said they would never use it. Some people wouldn't even use AI for their clinical notes. Just absolutely AI bad, human good. Almost that sort of idea. But I guess because I've, looked at this for a long time, and just kind of really looking around what's happening, the reality is there's a big need. So kind of when I talk about, by the time you go meet with psychologists, so there's a need for support, for therapy, for mental health. The reality is there aren't enough people out there, or people are stuck. They don't have the resources. They can't afford to go see someone, or they don't have
Mm.
access, or there are barriers to access, or and sometimes it's even more. Sometimes there are other difficulties. Say the person would want to go meet with, say a psychologist or a psychiatrist or a therapist, but they're in an abusive relationship and they can't get there safely, or there are all sorts of caveats. So like anything in this life, there's nuance, there's caveats, and it's important that we think these things through. So I don't do that, this one's all bad and this one is all good. And the reality is, again, if you look at the studies, people are using AI more and more, like they would, almost like the talking therapist, therapy. So whether it's a, therapist, a psychologist, a psychiatrist, people are using it for their mental health, for a soundboard. So it's a fact. So it's one of those things, okay, what are we going to do with it that we do it well? Um, I would still say, when it comes to the more serious things, please, do go see a professional person who's actually trained for all sorts of reasons, including that, safety and risk wise. People are trained for a reason, and it's to keep a person safe. And often people work in these multidisciplinary teams. It's not just the one person, but they kind of work in teams to, kind of work with this person in a holistic sort of way. So absolutely, that would be the first kind of, the first port of call. But like I said, reality is people will use AI for it. So it's what we're going to do with it. And which is another reason why I say, it would be really good. And it's not just psychology, because it's talking and it's human factors, it's an obvious one, but it's in all the sort of different professions. It would be really
Mm.
good if there's domain expertise in these AI models. And of course, I don't know if you ever, if you follow the data annotation world, it's precisely what they're doing in the background, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, they
But
are doing that.
yeah, that it's done well, and it's kind of done grassroots, where it really matters. But yes, that in itself, it's a whole, it's a whole kind of thing in itself of kind of, okay, what reaches these
It's
models
like
and
I believe it's like a whole new world is being formed right now. A parallel kind of world is being formed inside amongst us. So it's very concerning, and yeah, what we have to do is we have to be mindful in using AI. So my question is that uh, our concept of humanity or morality is different from like whatever I believe might not be approved by some other person. So, whose idea of humanity do you think is actually being built through these systems right now?
that's literally almost it's one of the grassroots questions that you absolutely are asking one of the most fundamental things, because we talk about values. So I don't know, I'm thinking of Anthropic, when they built in what they call constitutional AI into Claude. And they, by the way, they actually then later, amended it. And but that idea of building values into it. Okay, first question, whose values? Because people can have vastly different values. And that is, one of the fundamental questions, how these models get built and who builds them. So if you've read some of my articles, I wrote one about a bit more about the behavior and personalities of these AI models. Now, once again, these are machines that are built and and trained and everything. But it is really interesting because you can almost see, I wonder if I should actually do it as a blind study, but you can almost see, which model you're working with, knowing who built it in the background. The reality is, some of the almost the founders, you can almost see some of the characters of the founders of these AI labs in these AI models at times, or that idea of, whose values are built into this. And this is part of,
Mm,
why it's such an important field to look at. So yeah, and AI model behavior and personality, once again, machine personality, but it's growing fields, because
yeah,
people are realizing this, that actually downstream, what we find with these models as they're getting more powerful, more sophisticated, just the way we converse with them, people are realizing actually this is a thing. You can almost see it in these models. And I always say, look, in a way, it was almost expected, because the reality is we bake society in these AI models. And society, it's got good, bad, ugly, it's got all sorts of stuff in it. It was always
absolutely.
going
Yeah.
to be the case with AI models too. Yeah.
So, where should the responsibility like sit to the developers, I guess, or maybe the company, the regulators? We don't know. We can't say.
And this is a tough one, absolutely, where it gets developed and built crucially. But the reality is, I think it will need to be, pretty much everyone. I think everywhere, because, wherever it gets regulated. So when you look at my Substack, I've got this kind of six-tiered model, and it was really just to kind of make it a bit more visual. And that idea of, when I say human factors, it's everywhere in the artificial intelligence. It's at the, there are human factors at the building level of AI, human factors at the regulatory level, human factors at the adoption level, human factors in AI at the individual level, at the organization and company level, and at the societal level. And it's the same with responsibility. The responsibility would go across all those tiers, and obviously there are a lot of people, they're now dedicating their careers, whether they're in policy, whether they, AI ethics side, responsible AI side. But I genuinely think this will need to be a joint effort, in large part because it's going to impact all of us.
Yeah, yeah, it's going to be something very different, and something which we have to, we can't say anything right now. Like it's evolving. It's something which is evolving, and whatever happens, let's see what happens. So if AI ends up woven into our daily lives, which is already happening, what's the one thing you'd be most careful? not to lose, like we should be very careful not to lose about.
Mm.
Let's not lose that if we are using it
And
uh, so
this is
properly.
an interesting one, and there are quite a few, and because a lot of people, when we started out, we were saying, well, actually, critical thinking is one of them, critical thinking and judgment. But then there's also been people who said, well, actually, to an extent, depending how you use the AI, it could almost help in that sense. But look, what I would say, don't lose your critical thinking or your judgment or your discernment as a person. You have it for a reason. But then what I would add to that, I think for me as a psychologist too, for me it's one thing as an adult, right? If you use AI now and you think, okay, actually I will focus on this part and I'll make sure whatever is treasured to me that I won't lose this part. Whether it's my critical thinking, my judgment, my area of expertise, my connection with other people, whatever it is that is important to you. Now, if you're well aware of it, you can maybe guard it and protect it more and be more aware of it. But what happens with young people, who not only, that young person's, not only is their worldview still forming, they are still forming as a person. Their brain is literally still developing. I think for me, that is a big, big, big area. When AI, like with some of the other technologies, but once again, AI is different. If it is going to impact a young person's literal brain formation, because there could be a tipping point where it could actually have structural differences
Hmm.
in,
Yeah.
in a way change the trajectory of that young person's life. And for me, that is massive. You
Yeah.
know, someone whose brain development is still forming, and I would, I that for me is a massive field that I really hope people are, spending day and night to be sure that we do that right. Because steering there would be absolutely vital, because that will have it could have massive impact for someone down the line. But yeah,
Yeah, I believe so. And yeah, I mean, it's very much affecting the young people, and especially the growing age, I guess. So, like, it's very easily accessible. If we talk about if they are going through anything in their personal lives, for example. So instead of going to a therapist or psychologist, for instance, or anyone, they would just first, okay, this AI is there, we can talk about it, we can talk to it, and then everything will be fine. And it already works for many. Okay, so I believe that. So who should decide that what kind of AI powered future we are actually building? What do you think about that? At the end, who should decide that what kind of AI powered future we are actually building? What do you think?
ooh, and you're asking a probably $1 trillion question here. A few. This is the tough one, because the reality is, an ideal world is different, but the reality is, even if you just look at the mainstream news, right? There's a handful of these massive AI labs, and the reality is they have built and are building, these very powerful, AI models, and they're out there already. And I don't know if if you look at any of the open source stuff, there are millions there are absolutely loads of, stuff out there. It is not just the handful of AI models and agents that that people may be aware of. But so who should decide? Because, that's the thing. I think it's being decided for us already, and it's to what extent we really do realize it. And I remember there was this interview once with, one of the people from the AI lab saying that, let's try that it's a race to the top and not a race to the bottom. It's a kind of well-known, Dario Amodei from Anthropic said it. And, that idea, because of course there's a lot of money behind these things too. And, you know, like he, so rightly said, let's try that this is a race to the top and not a race to the bottom, So, it's such an interesting, if you're in the AI safety field and you follow, you always have this, you always have this dichotomy. There are people shouting and say, oh, we need to stop, we need guardrails, we need to, we need to pause a bit, because these AI models are getting too powerful, and they kind of, if there's any kind of stuff out of, out of the training stuff, between jailbreaking and, everything, kind of, and obviously you have the red teaming and black teaming. But it's not like anybody's stopping, because no one wants to stop, because then your competitor is just gonna, win the race. So it is a bit of a tough one. You almost see that grind, kind of
Mm.
almost between this, between these things. But who gets to decide is a tough one, because I always talk about society and kind of, 8 point, however many billion we are. The reality is this is going to impact us. And the reality right now, it is a absolute fraction of people who has a lot of power and who are building these models, and it is absolutely a fraction of people, and it's something that we should be aware of, and I think just that for each and every one of us, when we make decisions on a daily basis, just really think it through and how this impacts you, because the reality is some of these decisions are kind of made for us, whether we want to know it or not. So being aware of that would probably, be a wise port of call.
Yeah, so yeah, this is interesting actually. So what do you, I mean, what do you recommend? How we should use AI as a psychologist? What do you think that, I mean, the normal way, if we not taking a technical, how should we use it?
And that's such a, it's such an interesting, it's a really great question. And I'd really want people to think it through of what they want from this model. And also, like, again, just really and truly of them, themselves and their lives. Yeah. So people have all sorts of tips and ideas, when they, talk about prompting and outputs and stuff. But to me, it's obviously always more the deeper, human stuff too. But some of the practical stuff, people would say, actually, just be aware of how long you spend on AI, or more importantly, like I say, do a check on yourself. What's your mood like? What's your, just really do a check on yourself when you do engage with these models, what it feels like and whatnot. And, and again, more on the, prompt sort of side, sometimes people would, they either wouldn't go that deep with it, or they wouldn't use it like a friend or for advice or confidant. But the reality is a lot of people are, and they will continue to, So once again,
Absolutely.
it's that awareness and that individual choice, but just being really aware of how these models are built
Mm.
and keep engaging us, right? That brand bias is a massive kind of inbuilt thing. But so really, just again, it's about awareness and noticing stuff, noticing what's happening for you. But yeah, some people would say, they would literally say to the model, "Don't just agree with me, or disagree with me, or can you poke holes
Mm.
in what I'm saying here, or can you, can you give me counter arguments?" So it kind of depends a bit on the topic and kind of what you're working on, whether you're doing research for an essay, or whether once again you're kind of confiding in it. But yeah, but again, it's about awareness, and it's what individual people, just be really, really aware. And to me, it's about, to me, it's about the longer term. To me, it's not necessarily about your kind of chat with, one of your, your favorite model, whatever today. It's what about if you do it daily for the next 10 years? You know, what will the impact then be? For me, it's that idea. I often talk about it when when I write some of my articles, that idea of at scale and over time. I keep coming back to that, at scale and over time. What will it do at scale and over time? Because that to me is where the impacts will be. It might not be a one, this big, kind of revelatory thing in any given moment, but at scale and over time, the impacts will be massive.
Absolutely. And yeah, ultimately, we have to be, as I already said, we have to be mindful in using AI because we should know where we are exceeding our use. So I think we can wrap. But one thing before I wrap, what is at the end what you want to say to everyone who is using AI as a psychologist? What is right now? Would you like to end this?
It's really about awareness because, like I see, people are using it and they will use it. That's it. We're not gonna, that's it. It's happening. So how do we do this well? It's really about noticing. And I like to say, notice when you interact with a large language model or with an AI agent. Notice what's happening in that interaction, but also notice in yourself as a person. Notice what's happening for you. Like I've said, notice your mood, notice your patience, thoughts, notice your, notice your thinking, notice and sometimes stand back from it, and also notice your interactions with other people. So, all the neuro stuff, stuff, our concentration, our memory, our attention spans, our executive functioning, how we make decisions, how we, kind of all those sort of things. AI is impacting all of this. So really, again, it's just that awareness, notice things. I think that would be about probably one of my biggest takeaways, that we don't have to be these passive recipients. We
Mm.
can still steer. We can steer AI. We can steer how we use it. We can steer what we make of it. We can steer a lot, that, and it is still a tool. We are still the human. It is still a tool, and absolutely, they are getting more powerful and more sophisticated. So absolutely, a lot of stuff will happen, again,
Yeah.
that scale. But we are still the human. It is still a tool that we can steer. That we realize we have agency, and we have choices. We can make decisions. Yeah, that we just kind of keep thinking of it in that sort of way.
Yeah, I mean, we have to notice, we have to be aware about the surroundings and everything, keep our minds open, and because we cannot remove it now from our lives. It's a part of our lives, and we have to work with it. So yes, so I think we'll end here. Thank you so much for joining, and thank you for cooperating throughout because of so many issues. It was not a day. So thank you so much,
You're
and
very
thank you so much for having being here.
well. I'm just checking before you. I see Leo. Yeah, he's kind of, said something in the chat. I personally find it difficult to use because it does, understand how I communicate, and that's such an interesting comment. Because when people, I get almost diverse. I have some people who absolutely, they say they love it, and like I say, they engage with AI all the time, and they have really personal conversations. And then I have people saying that too, that they say actually they really, really don't enjoy chatting to LLM. So that's quite an interesting divide too.
Mm.
We shouldn't assume that everybody's using it all the time for everything, because this is not the case. But yes, loads of people are. And I would say more and more are using it for more and more personal sort of stuff. Yeah. Thanks for that comment, Leo.
Thank you for commenting, Leo, and I hope that many people would join because of the issue. I guess there was some technical issue. People joined earlier, but yeah. Anyway, it was an interesting conversation with you, and I really liked because um, psychologically and like we are all dealing, we are using AI in our work life, but how is it affecting our minds? It's very important to know right now. So thank you so much, and we can end here. Okay, thank you.
Brilliant. You're welcome. Nice to meet you.
Okay, we can end here. Okay, thank you.